Thank you for asking me to present our results here. My name is Camilla Brørup Dyssegaard, and besides being an associate professor here at the university, I'm also head of the Danish Clearinghouse for Educational Research. And today what I'm going to be telling you about is a project we're working on for the ministry. We're not finished with it, so what you'll be hearing today are the preliminary results of our work. But what we're working with is what enables effective implementation of externally produced evidence in schools. And as I said, the project has been commissioned by the Ministry of Children, Education, and Gender Equality, and it is twofolded. So we have a state of the field of 10 countries where we've been out interviewing major people, central people in ministries about teacher education, what is the legislation about using evidence in schools. I'll come back to that. And then we're doing a state of the evidence, which is a full systematic review, and I'll also tell you more about that, but where this is the theoretical part, and we're also looking at international research on how do we best possibly implement research. What does it actually take to do it? So I'll start with the state of the field. We have 10 countries we've interviewed. We have Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland, England, Scotland, Ontario, Canada, Maryland, United States, and New South Wales, and New Zealand. So these are the 10 countries we've been working with. And the starting point has been what we wanted to do was do a systematic information search for policy documents, legal framework, and strategy papers from governmental and non-governmental organizations. So we've been searching the ministry's home pages, central organizations, and looking for, is there any legislation in this area about using evidence? What do they say? How do they promote it? We've also been looking at some of the universities' home pages to see, is there a formal collaboration between, for example, schools and universities, et cetera. And then we've also done qualitative interviews with key informants. So, and as I said, this is preliminary, so we're not finished with the analysis yet, but what we were interested in finding out is, again, policies and strategies. And there's a great difference between these countries about how formal the legislation is regarding using research in teacher education, but also in schools. We were interested in the economy. Is this an area the governments have a priority around? Is this something they're giving funding to actually promote the use of research? We were interested in how research dissemination is going on. What are the requirements, expectations directed at teachers? Initiatives that support knowledge exchange, are they doing something very specific? Use of research in teacher education and further training of teachers. How is it after teacher education? Is there a formal, again, do you have to take special courses or something to maintain, for example, your certification as a teacher? And finally, also experience with knowledge mobilization, how they're working with it. So, what we can see generally right now, that all of the countries, all 10 countries have just recently had major school reforms. All countries have some form of a national curriculum, some more fixed than other. And a fixed curriculum is if they are told exactly what they're supposed to, which methods to use, and also what curriculum they're going to be teaching in. We can also see in most countries, teacher education programs are placed at universities. I think the only one left where it isn't at all is Denmark. All countries but one have national tests. All countries have organizations that disseminate knowledge, which is very different how they do it. Danish Clearinghouse is an example in Denmark, but where Professor Steve Higgins comes from in Durham, that's in the Education Endowment Foundation, which is also not a governmental organization. But I won't say more about that. Steve, you can do that. 6 countries demand certification of teachers, so there are very specific criteria to be able to teach. 6 countries have requirements for continuing professional development, and I'm sure a lot of you here will say, wow, we in the Nordic countries would be very happy if we had quite as much time to give our teachers professional development. And 6 countries have mandatory introduction periods. This means that when the young teachers go out in the schools, they have, for example, a mentor of a more experienced teacher who will advise them, but also supervise them in classes and follow their progress. So this is just to give you a picture how it looks across the 10 countries regarding teacher education, if there's one or several possibilities to become a teacher, if it requires a certification, something specific, and also if there is a formal introduction period, something you have to do, which is actually legislated. So this is one of the things also we'll be discussing in the workshops, which is interesting, personal attitudes and culture change. Now I'd like to underline what we're looking at here is how to implement. So what does it take to actually implement something evidence-based in schools? So if we look here, we can see what is common across the countries, that teachers are described as being stressed on time. They don't have time to look up for where is the research and how to use it. They're stressed on curriculum also. I do not have the time to look at new evidence-based strategies because I also have to do the curriculum that is expected of me. They're stressed regarding preparation. When am I going to be able to do this? Bless you. And they're also challenged in seeing the relevance of research results in their practice. Again, what I'm doing is functioning for me. I've been doing this for many years. Why would I be interested in looking at new research when this is actually working out for me? So if you look at some of the differences between the countries, the autonomy of teachers vary a lot. And I can say there's a big difference from Maryland to Denmark, for example. In Denmark, we get to do whatever we want, and we have the freedom of choice completely of how and which methods we use in our teaching. Guidelines for the curriculum and almost fixed curriculum. And this is also an interesting point because we have, again, we can say Denmark, we have some advisory points to follow, but otherwise it's up to the individual teacher to decide how to do it. Contra, we have fixed curriculum where it actually is, for example, in Maryland, it is the state who figures out which methods to use and what we're going to be teaching in, so the teachers are secured that they're actually working evidence-based because it's served for them. Then we have the respects for teachers vary a lot. Is it a high prestige job we're talking about here, or not so? And again, assessment practices, use of tests and data vary very much. And this is also, this assessment point is also what we see in the research is quite an important point. So if we also look at professional development, how does it look across the 10 countries? In Denmark, there are no legal requirements to keep continuing developing your career. In Sweden, no legal requirements. Norway, none. Finland, they have one that says 3 days per year you have to do some sort of professional development. England, there are no requirements. Scotland, they have a legal requirement, 35 hours a year, career-long learning. And I can say many teachers would be very envious of the possibility of getting 35 hours a year to actually develop yourself professionally in some way. Canada, Ontario, they have appraisal every 5 years, which require professional development. So they cannot keep teaching if they don't do this every 5th year. Maryland, all teachers must pursue professional development continually. And in New South Wales, there's a legal requirement of minimum 100 hours of professional development every 3 years. And finally, New Zealand, also a legal requirement to participate in professional development, a minimum every 3 years. So you can see this varies very much across the countries also, but also that it's very specific and there's funding also for the teachers to do it. And it's in many different ways. And I think one of the interesting things I'm looking forward to going into a bit more, if you look at Scotland, the teacher association there are actually the ones who are keeping an eye on teachers also, that they're actually doing what is expected of them and continuing to develop themselves, and also keeping an eye on they're actually doing the courses they have to maintain their teaching criteria. That's a quite different rule we have in the teachers' union in Denmark. That's not exactly what they work with. So this was the state of the field. Now we're going to look at what we're doing in the full systematic review. And what is very interesting here is we can see, of course, when you do interviews like this, you'll also get a lot of subjective opinions of the people you're actually talking to. And it could, of course, also vary according to who you're talking to. But the interesting thing is the things that we've been hearing in the 10 countries actually cross with the results we can see in the international research. So we have 2 questions here, and we've been looking for research in these 2 areas. How can empirical research in the field be characterized in regard to origin, frequency, purpose, approach, research design results, and research quality? And again, what promotes or hinders the implementation of research-based knowledge and knowledge implementation in primary and lower secondary school? So again, what we're looking for, what can we learn from the research in how to implement, how do we actually get this across to the schools? So we found 6 themes. I can tell you we've been through approximately 10,000 studies. And then we've screened them and quality assessed them. And right now we have 33 studies left, which is very typical for a systematic review. And we've come across at this time 6 themes. The first is fidelity. And fidelity, it's regarding how true are the teachers to the intervention they're implementing. It could, for example, be reading. If you have an intervention where it says the children have to read 20 minutes a day, are the teachers actually taking the time to give the children 20 minutes a day? The next theme is professional development. Implementers and facilitators. What this means is how are they working with people actually supporting either at the school level or at the teacher level to implement research? The personal attitudes and culture change. Principal leadership in engagement, so it's both at the head of the schools, but it could also be wider in team leaderships. And sustainability and life cycles, so say how long are the schools or the teachers actually working with the intervention? Are they actually maintaining it? And also we can see that there's a natural death cycle to these new interventions. That at some point they stop and something new starts again. So, if we look a little more closely at the themes. Now, I'd also like to say that you might find it odd that there are more than 33 studies represented here, but that's because the studies can be in more than one theme. So, we have 19 here. And what we can see, and again, this is just to give you an impression what type of studies, what is it we're seeing under these themes. And again, I'd like to underline that this is a preliminary analysis I've done. So, but one thing we can see, relevant background knowledge. It's really important that the teachers know what is it exactly this is, and why is it it's expected of me, and is it a good idea. Again, also to be true to the instructions that are in the intervention, that the teachers are actually doing what is recommended and described. And again, we can see, and not that surprising maybe, but very important, that if the teachers don't believe this intervention has a positive effect, they might not be that interested in really following an implementation. Then we have a new curriculum that is intangible and non-prescriptive, is difficult to implement. One of the examples I can give you here, this is not a study in the review, but for example in Denmark, our new school reform, many of the teachers have been told you have to vary the way you teach. And this is something that's very difficult for many teachers. How, what, and when, and why, and how do I do this in math, etc. And we can see when this happens, it's also very difficult for teachers to implement interventions. This is interesting, but again, perhaps not that surprising. High implementation scores are found where the staff is more unqualified. And then you can say, oh, this is strange, but again, not really. Because if we're in rural areas where teachers, where it's not, teachers may not be qualified, they may not actually have a teacher education, well, then they're probably more motivated to taking an intervention when they come, when some research-based intervention, and they say, oh goodness, this is what I need, this can help me in my everyday practice. But again, an interesting result. And then we have the implementation fidelity has vital significance if there's going to be an effect of an intervention. And finally, and this is something I think also we should be very aware of also in perhaps in the Nordic countries also, but lack of measures of student improvement. This is something we see. The assessment of the students is really important. And it's important also because what we can see is that that's also where the teachers are evaluating themselves and perhaps also becoming less stressful because they can actually see what they're doing is having an effect on the students. Or perhaps even maybe more important, maybe it's not. And if it's not, why is it not? And is it perhaps something else we should be doing? So, theme 2, professional development. We have 17 studies here. And this is, again, just to give you some examples of how it is. But we have studies that give 5 3-hour collaborative seminars over a period of 3 months. And when I say professional development, again, this is in the studies regarding evidence-based interventions and how they're being implemented. What is being done to secure the implementation of this? So this is one example. They have also where they're doing introductory training and 7 monthly skills sessions and coaching. So you can see this is quite a long period of time, and this is also some of the essential facts we're seeing here, that it takes time and we have to keep following up on what we're doing. Are we still maintaining the fidelity, etc. Interventions specifically targeted teacher skills in handling children with behavioral problems. We have quite a few also of these studies with these children who have behavioral difficulties and also how the teachers are being coached to approach these children. And then we have content and pedagogical focus courses and long-term collaboration with universities. Quite a few of these studies and implementation, it's perhaps research assistance or it's research going on in the schools where the universities are following the process and also advising the teachers. Okay, so we have the theme 3, implementers and facilitators. Here we have 15 studies. So what we can see is really important. It is team collaboration. And it is definitely a word that is going through all the studies, are collaboration. It's really important that we're working together on this, but also in a very formal way. So it's not just a question of saying I can sit down with my team and discuss it, but actually to make sure that this is happening and they're following the process. We have coaching, and this could be different professionals coming out coaching the teachers or the heads of school or the whole school. We have teachers versus psychologists who are implementing this, and this is actually kind of interesting. This study also is looking at what happens if you coach both teachers and psychologists to do the implementation. And actually, when the teachers are well prepared, it turns out that they're the best ones to implement things in classes because they know their students best. Again, perhaps not so surprising, but also an important thing to know that actually the teachers have a very main role here. We can see, sorry, trained behavioral coaches. And this, again, specialists that come out who have a specific knowledge about the area and are helping the teachers. Instructional consultation teams that are out in the schools and are following what's going on in the school and also being able to support the teachers along the way. As I mentioned before, research assistants. And finally, again, specialists. So what we can see is it's really important that we have people who know what is it we're trying to implement, who can follow the process continually and also support the teachers. I'm sorry. Okay, theme 4, personal attitudes and culture change. We have 15 studies here. We have again, and you can see some of these results are also lapping over each other, but we have clear communication and understanding of the mission. Again, what are we actually working with? And it's also many of these things that are implemented, especially at a school level, are characterized by there being top-down decisions. And the idea here being that we have to follow legal legislation or the municipalities, what they're telling us to do, but then we also have to make sure to go back to our schools, to the teachers, and find a way to say this is what we're working with, this is the goal of our mission, and we have a mutual and common understanding of what is expected of us and why we're actually working in this way. Then again, we can see high teacher turnover limits the prevalence rate. Again, if there's a lot of teachers quitting and new teachers being hired, it of course is difficult to maintain a fidelity over towards the implementations. Okay, again, are the teachers able and willing to implement the project? Is this something they're actually interested in doing? Of course, if they're very interested, this is a good thing. Individual differences between teachers' acceptance, and then again, this is also connected to the bottom up and the top down. Again, that we have to have a mutual and common understanding. And it can be very difficult if it's a school-wide intervention you're trying to implement, if the teachers are in very different corners of acceptance. Again, engagement also, if you want the children to start working in different ways, it's of course important also that they can see their teachers are actually interested in them doing it. Now I'm repeating myself that the teachers are committed. And also one of the things that's really difficult and is hindering this, it's teachers' autonomy, because many of the teachers are saying, you might want me to implement this, but I have my own practice. I've been doing this. I know what I'm doing is working. I know it's good. I've been here for 20 years, and I'm not interested in you taking my autonomy away from me. And then again, teachers' workload and lack of time. Okay, so theme 5, principal leadership and engagement. There are 11 studies here, and I actually think this first one is really interesting because what we can see, I think all of us in here probably know that heads of schools and leadership teams in general are very important for any change in organizations. But what I think is interesting here is what we can see is that if the teachers act, if the leaders act, heads of schools or the leadership teams know what this intervention, how to do it in the classes. Now, I'm not saying that the heads of school have to go down and teach in Danish, but what we can see is it gives better results of the implementation if they know what it takes, what it requires of the teachers. How are they organizing their classes, materials, etc. And we can actually see that directly supports the academic output of the children, but also the fidelity towards implementation. Also, it is seen in the studies that flexible leaders who are helping their teachers to find the time to do this, but also saying, I think that's the communication prize some of you are working with today, saying how do we optimize, how do we actually make the teachers want to do this, and also support them and say this is good going, and here, now you get a course next week, or whatever it is they choose to do. Trust and shared leadership, again, not surprising for most of us if that the teachers feel their heads of schools trust them to do what they're doing and also have an opinion that they're actually doing it quite good, and also sharing the responsibility. This has a direct effect on a good implementation. Principals as an active part of the intervention implementation, especially at the start, they have to go and take the first steps. And they have to show their teachers, this is the way we're going, and I'm here also, and I'm very interested in what you're doing and how it's going. And again, we can see, and I think if you read this about the principals, I'll let you read it yourself, but again, we're probably not surprised that principals who are very good at following their school's development and looking at the data and setting goals, well, these are the type of principals that also are very good in regards to implementing new interventions. And finally, changing principles is not that good. Again, if we're in the middle of an implementation process and the principals switch jobs, well, this is also something that could hinder a positive implementation. So, the final theme, sustainability and life cycles. We have 6 studies here. And one thing that is very interesting here, and we see across many of the studies, is that sticking with the principles in spite of problems faced along the way. So mainly saying don't give up halfway, even you think this is getting very difficult, but holding on and saying we'll continue working with it. One of the things we can see hinders is a continued growth of new programs, and this is something that is definitely affecting the teachers very much, where they can feel that there are many changes and constantly new things we want them to do, and that makes them say, well, we're not going to take another program with us. Regression occurring in the second year, this is seen very often in implementation processes, and when we know school development is very difficult, those of you who know, for example, the LP model, when Thomas Nordahl, he started this, he said it takes 2 years to change a school's organization. And then he started and he said, okay, it's not working yet, so 3 years. And today I think he would say we're talking about at least 5 years. So. And what we can see here, and it's really important that we keep holding on because there's a lot of regression going on in the second year of implementation. This one is probably not surprising to you, but also something to take into consideration, that the projects where there's funding from the beginning, the schools or the teachers might be very excited and they're supported, and we can have courses and specialists, and okay, we have that for 2 years and it stops, and then the intervention is given up. And then again, of course, it can be very difficult if the intervention that is expected to be implemented doesn't really fit in with the other strategies and policies and programs that are already in the schools. And last but not least, that a really important theme is that you have to do continuous efforts to maintain this is what we're doing, and look at it and talk about it with the teachers and the whole school audience, so you're sure that there is a continuous interest in what we're actually working towards. And just before I end, so you have, I promised I would give you 5 minutes for questions, but what we're working on, and we haven't got there yet, is also looking at what are the differences between implementing school-wide interventions and perhaps smaller interventions on a class level? Is there also different characteristics there? So, thank you for your attention, and you are welcome to ask a few questions.